One of America's foremost biographers is Walter Isaacson, perhaps the foremost biographer, the author, of course, of biographies of Albert Einstein and now of Steve Jobs. Walter, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Good to be here.
Walter, at the beginning of your book, you talk about assessing the historical influence of Steve Jobs. It's a masterful book. And for our viewers, the very few amongst them perhaps who haven't had the chance yet to read the book, how would you assess Jobs' historic influence?
I think there's certain people who are very good at connecting art to technology. He always liked to say he stood at the intersection of the humanities and engineering. And you can see Edison, Ford doing that, Walt Disney, many people. And secondly, he created a company that has that inbred into its DNA. Apple didn't just make, the iMac or the iPhone or the iPod. It continually has come out with very creative products. So I think his legacy is not up there. When he died, I think people put him up there with Leonardo and Einstein. People ask me about it because I'd written about Einstein. He's certainly not, in that pantheon, but he's in the pantheon of people who really cared about making a connection, which was the genius of, the 20th century, making a connection between great artistry and great technology.
Could it be argued that he's the first entrepreneur to really understand the consumer?
I hadn't thought. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know really, because you can take Henry Ford, you can take people throughout the 20th century.
Perhaps the 21st century consumer.
Yes, I think that he made a more emotional connection with the consumer. Other people had made MP3 players, but when you opened that box and saw that first iPod, and it was just beautifully designed and elegantly simple, but the simplicity had a real depth to it because you could put 1,000 songs in your pocket and get to any one within 3 clicks. That, was something that was not just an invention. It was very entrepreneurial, very beautiful. And then to move on to do that with the iPhone and to create a tablet. Other people have been, tablets have been around for 10 years, and yet he does it in a way that emotionally connects to consumers.
One of the memorable aspects of your book is your description of Jobs as an obsessive consumer, a consumer of kitchen equipment, furniture, movies, music. Why was he so obsessive as a consumer?
When he had his houses, it was very hard for him to furnish them because he didn't want any products he didn't think were perfect. He and Johnny Ive, the great industrial designer who was his soulmate at Apple, Johnny told me the story of traveling through Europe, and they both picked up a knife that looked like it was beautifully designed, but then they each saw that there was a little bit of glue that held the blade in, and that spoiled everything. Steve said it was very hard for him to buy, a washing machine. Steve and his wife talking about the concept of a sofa and what is a sofa supposed to do. So it was that either it's perfect or it totally sucks, that mentality that he had in his professional life. It was there in his personal life as well when it came to furnishing the house.
What took place inside him, though? Did a light bulb go off every time he saw a piece of furniture, or he sent back a drink at a hotel that he thought was wrong, or some piece of code or electronic equipment that wasn't quite right?
He sort of thought in a binary fashion. You're either a hero or a shithead, or something was totally awesome or it totally sucked. I would tell the story of the 2 avocados he had that to you and me would be indistinguishable. And he declared, he tastes one and says it's the best avocado ever grown, and that the other one was totally inedible. I think there are just certain people who don't see the gray areas that much. They see something as either being, somebody being a genius or being really stupid, something as being absolutely perfect or totally sucking.
As a biographer, you must be fascinated, I'm guessing, between the relationship between your subject and the times they live in. In your mind, did Jobs stand outside his historical period, or is he a reflection of what's happening in the broader culture?
I think he was very much a reflection of the late 1960s, early 1970s in Northern California, where, he was a hippie, he was into dropping acid and seeking, Zen enlightenment. So he had that counterculture streak to him. But he was also in the engineering, the Hewlett-Packard Explorers Club, doing engineering. And you see these different strands merge with the Whole Earth catalog and all the things that were happening in the Bay Area in Northern California in the early 1970s. And Steve is almost the epitome of that merger between the counterculture and the electronic culture.
Would it also be fair to say that Steve is a reflection of the way in which the counterculture lost interest in politics? And perhaps his obsessive consumerism and his fundamental disinterest in politics reflects that, and he is a symbol of that.
Yeah, I do think that, though, there was a certain idealism that Steve felt he kept from the 60s, which is reflected in...
But it was a personal idealism.
Personal and also a
political.
product idealism. That a product was, you were searching for the ideal design of a particular machine. He was not political. He was not civically engaged. He, had some political thoughts about everything from education reform. He was basically a Democrat who supported Obama. But he was never part of the free speech movement at Berkeley in the late 1960s. He was never that engaged in, big political struggles.
So he poured his idealism, his perfectionism into his products rather than into society.
And also he was, part of the strand that was into personal enlightenment. I mean, he tries all sorts of those, from Zen training to going to find a guru in India to primal scream to a variety of things. That was one of the strands of the early 1970s as well, was sort of the Essel and Est strand of personal enlightenment. But he was not deeply political.